All right, guys. Our next guest is the creme de la creme of combat sports analysis. You know him from his phenomenal work on the award-winning Morning Combat, where him and Brian Campbell do an excellent job of predominantly drinking liquor in hotel rooms, among, I don't know, probably other things. Here to help us preview UFC 276, Luke Thomas. Welcome back to your number 3 on your most blocked numbers list. We found your new number, and here you are. Thank you for joining us yet again.
I'm happy to be here, gentlemen. It's a big day, I know, for Aussie MMA and Oceanic MMA, so I'm happy to be and delighted to be invited back.
Man, I'll tell you, it's huge card, and we can't wait to watch it. But I wonder, like, now that you're over there in Vegas, do you have a favorite international fight week card that you've covered that stands out to you?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask that because I spent the majority of my career not going on the road. Going on the road is actually something I do now that things have changed for me a little bit. I did go to, I'll tell you this, the most memorable one, and I think I mentioned this on one of the previews we did, but it was the one where they did back-to-back fight nights with a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or maybe it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
And I can't remember anymore.
UFC 200.
UFC right? 200, yeah. And then you had Alvarez, RDA, and then Joanna and Claudia Cadella. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember when we were all sitting together, Luke, and we were like, oh, man, like, it was like a good fight. It was like a good fight night card. You know, it was that Eddie Alvarez, I think it was Eddie Alvarez RDA title fight in the main event. And we were like, not taking it for granted, but we were like, oh, man, like, we have so many cards to cover. Like, and these days, that's like, you'd be lucky to have a fight like that in the main event of a pay-per-view. But back then, it was like, oh, this is just another fight card. Like, oh.
Yeah, so I would say that one stands out the most, but I'm not sure how many of these I've been to, so that might be the only one that I have.
Well, I mean, if you're going to pick one, that was a great one to go to. All right, let's get balls deep into this, man. We got two juicy fights. We'll start at the very top, man, with Jared Cannonier taking on Israel Adesanya. And I think you're the perfect guy to be talking about CKB, guys, given your extensive and great analysis. But I want to look at Jared here because probably the biggest storyline from Jared as sort of a challenger's perspective in terms of marketing for this fight and storyline is his past as a heavyweight and light heavyweight. That's what you see in all the countdowns and everybody's factoring that in. I wonder though, how relevant do you think that actually will be in this fight, if at all?
When you say a factor or it's a thing you discuss, what about it stands out? Like, I just want to make sure I answer the question correctly. Like, to you, why would that be relevant?
Well, because when you look at, say, the countdown and like the marketing from the UFC promotion and, just a lot of the previews, people talk about like Jared Cannonier, he used to be a heavyweight, he used to be a light heavyweight. And so it makes it almost seem like, hey, Israel's taking on this like really big, really strong guy, which he is. But I just wonder how relevant that's actually going to be in the fight, given that Israel's taken on, big, strong guys in the past. Paulo Costa, Yoel Romero, not exactly tiny guys. And I just wonder if, how much of that is just kind of a way to market the fight and how much of it will actually be relevant in the fight itself.
Well, I mean, it's a cool story for Jared that he came in as a heavyweight. And the first time I ever interviewed him, this was years ago, I think he had dropped to light heavy at that point, but he was still living in Alaska, working in the military as like an air traffic controller. So he's had a really long path to get to this point, and eventually I think he got out of that, and he was obviously moved to Arizona, an MMA lab. But in terms of like the fight itself, I don't know how relevant it is in terms of like the past and what that tells us. You can sort of pick up a couple things from it. Namely, he's got good punching power. He's got good kicking power too. Look what he did to Anderson Silva, right? He is heavy-handed. His power has carried up weight classes, quite literally, right? Even though he's come down, you can see what he can do at 205 and at heavyweight. So that makes him dangerous. And, it's interesting. One of the questions I asked him I think I also interviewed him at least once in his middleweight campaign. And I remember asking him, like, it's kind of an interesting thing. You think as a person, especially as like a pro athlete, that what size should you be. It almost seems like intuitive, like you would just know that kind of a thing. And he said he just really, not that it didn't occur to him, these are questions that they had considered, but he had success at 205. To that point, he had been putting people's lights out in a lot of cases. But I think a couple of the fights, like the Glover Teixeira fight and some other ones, were kind of an eye opener because it wasn't just a skill difference. There was like a real, like one of those guys naturally sat in those positions, another one didn't. And so it really informed his judgment about what the best weight class would be. In the middleweight campaign, the results have spoken for themselves. So when I think about like what is the relevancy of the fact that he has fought at 205 and even higher, again, it goes back to the power. He has tremendous punching power. He has tremendous striking power generally. He knows what it's like to lock up with someone very strong. If you look at him now, he doesn't have like an ounce of fat on him. He really has filled out in this weight class. Like he's devastating in terms of just his physicality overall for this weight class. But, Izzy is a very different beast than all of those guys. He's quick. He's nimble. He makes great decisions. He does have the same frame as a lot of light heavyweights and heavyweights. So that could play some kind of potential role. In other words, Cannonier's not unaccustomed to fighting guys taller and rangier. He actually has a lot of experience with that. But beyond that, I don't see it as I'll say this. I personally don't see it as a hugely significant factor other than to say the guy can crack, and that could potentially play a big role.
One of the things that is going to be a big factor here is speed. Jared Cannonier, even though he has moved down from heavyweight, when we usually see someone move down, I suppose sometimes we do see them pick up some speed. We usually see it happen, I suppose, when they move up as well. More likely when they move up. But with Jared, we saw in the Derek Brunson fight, one of the issues going into this fight will be it does take him a long time to load up when he throws shots. His shots and his footwork aren't as smooth, obviously, or nearly as quick as what Israel is going to be throwing at him. The distance and the range is obviously on Israel's side as well. How, if you're Jared and you're at this point right now in your career, what kind of adjustments do you think you could make to your striking, to your movements, to your speed, to the way you throw your strikes to try and deal with Israel and his masterful distance control and actually being able to land some kind of shot on him in this fight?
I think the big one, and this is something I've said a lot, and every time, so Izzy has had fights where they've been really exciting, and he's had fights where the fans didn't necessarily think it was all that exciting. I mean, a lot of people didn't think the Romero fight, it's not going to go in the UFC Hall of Fame, and of course, both competitors and just styles making fights is the way you would explain the outcome there. But to me, I go back to the Blachowicz fight. Blachowicz had two really big things he did well. One, of course, was the takedowns, right? And then the top control. And that was where you saw a lot of like weight difference being a factor. But the other one was checking the leg kicks. I mean, this is a thing that Izzy does. I'm going to mention here in just a second that it drives the fans crazy that he wins with it. But it's like, dude, you just need to accept it that he's good at it. He's voluminous with it. He's accurate with it. And he just finds all kinds of openings. He is very good at landing leg kicks when some other thing. I mean, he lands leg kicks in all scenarios. But what I mean to say is even if you took away a lot of the other parts of his offense, he can somewhat retreat to that and can win rounds that way. He can win fights that way. He defends titles that way. And sometimes the people who don't like it drives them crazy. And I'm like, you need to just accept this is a thing that he does. And what did Blachowicz do? Blachowicz was very, very good about either getting out of the way of them or, more importantly, checking them. He checked them a lot. He took away a lot of that sort of foundational offense that Izzy had in that contest, which, in my judgment, brought the fight a little bit closer together. The leg kicks just weren't really working for him. He couldn't quite create the openings. And so it moved a little bit closer into punching range at times. It naturally made Izzy. I think if you try to chase Izzy, if you try to constantly pressure him, he's really good about evasion. His footwork is phenomenal. Takedowns along the fence, I do think that there is going to be some kind of role that they play or clinching or whatever. But, Blachowicz is much, much, much naturally bigger than Jared Cannonier. I think he's going to have a hard time establishing the takedown, and even if he gets it, making sure that he can stay and score meaningful offense with it. You have to force Izzy to elect to close the range a little bit. So when Blachowicz was able to check those leg kicks, it kind of forced Izzy a little bit to go to second order offense, which was along the lines of his boxing, and that wasn't nearly as. Again, I think that it's wrong to say any part of Izzy striking is bad. That's not true at all. All of it is good. But all the pieces kind of work together. Everything has kind of be in place. And if you can diminish the capacity of the leg kicks, he has to make other choices about what other kinds of offense he wants to use. And it seems to me very unlikely, you never know, and we could see, but it seems unlikely that he might go for a takedown. It seems unlikely that he would go for, I'm going to find the back and choke him out. That's not typically how Izzy has ever really won fights, unless he really hurt someone or something like that. So to me, all roads begin and end with what is Jared Cannonier going to do about the leg kicks. Now, what's interesting, I looked at some of this in the lead up to this fight. He's got a sort of a weird pattern about it. Sometimes he can be very active with the leg kicks and he's chopping at people. I wonder what role that might play. But there's a lot of fights where guys go after him and he's chopping at them and he doesn't really check it. So in the Robert Whittaker fight, he was attacking a lot with the leg kicks. Robert Whittaker, not so much. But in other contests, he's been kind of lit up with it. Really, that to me is going to pay attention to what Cannonier does with his own leg kicking, and then more importantly, what he does to Izzy kicking. Does he find a way to take it away? And if he does, now you got a big fight on your hands. But if not, it's going to be very, very difficult for him to find meaningful offense.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, Jan is a fantastic example of someone that Izzy has fought. Obviously, didn't go his way, but it's another guy that came down from heavyweight. And that's kind of what the point I was trying to make before about despite the marketing. I just don't see it that, if Jared is going to win, at the end of the fight, people are going to be like, oh, he won because he used to fight at heavyweight. He was that sheer size and strength and power that, got him through. I think it's going to be something, more tactical than that. And Eugene Berriman actually spoke to us about Jared's mindset and how, unlike Paulo Costa, Jared's willing to adapt and sort of take risks, even when the fight isn't going his way. Like we saw that in the Brunson fight, wasn't going his way. He managed to, he has that resolve. And even in the Whittaker fight where the third round, it still wasn't going well for him, but he just kept trying new things. Eugene said, look, Paulo was like a deer in the headlights and Jared's just not going to be that. What do you see as sort of, his biggest threat in that regard?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is, though, at 205, when I go back to it, it's true Blachowicz came down, and then at light heavyweight, it's much more of a natural weight class for him. With Jared, though, people being like, oh, he's oversized for middleweight. No, he's not. He's a big, strong middleweight. Again, very physical for the weight class. But I would refer everyone, go watch Cannonier versus Teixeira. It's pretty clear that's the wrong weight class for him. He needed to go to middleweight to make the most of his physicality, and he's done that. Now, in terms of the thing you described, I think you nailed it exactly. Dude, you brought up the Whittaker fight where he gets rocked, but then he just refuses to quit, and he obviously found a way to stick it to Robert later in the fight as well. He was having his moments there too, just unbelievable. In the word you used, I think, is correct, internal resolve to just persevere. And in other ways, too, more strategic. So, for example, Robert was putting it on him for a long time, and he had to kind of deal with it. But one thing, you go back to the Jack Hermanson fight. Hermanson was trying to pull him into these grappling exchanges. And, the rule with MMA is, if you jiu-jitsu for jiu-jitsu, if you go to a tournament, that's the only thing you can use. But in MMA, you have to force someone to use, if you want to use jiu-jitsu on someone, you have to force those terms on him. And look at the scrambling that Jared Cannonier had it. So that tells you a few things. One, he has just Izzy, when he gets taken down, there's this urgency where he has to get up. Cannonier's got a lot of that too, man. Cannonier's got a lot of that. So that's the first thing I would say. Second part is it tells you that, he's got a great team and a great camp. They clearly knew that. And of course, with Hermanson, that's not all that surprising. By the way, Hermanson, another guy who landed a lot of leg kicks on Jared Cannonier, albeit very different striker, very different contexts. But the point I'm trying to make is it just shows you that you have that resolve, you have that physicality, right, that he brings to this weight class, and a good camp from a good, I'm sure he had a good actual camp, the 6 to 12 week experience itself, beyond being just an MMA lab. He's going to come prepared. He probably is going to have a very good game plan. Those guys, there's a lot of tape on Izzy at this point in MMA. There's a lot of it. And there's been a lot of tape in situations where he's thriving, where he has to struggle a little bit. There's situations where he's going forward, where he's backing up. And I'm sure Izzy's always innovating too and switching things up. Please don't misunderstand me, but there's a lot of tape on him, dude. They're going to come with a good game plan. I am not banking on Cannonier just running into shit like an amateur. I don't think that's the case really at all. MMA is crazy. You never know. Izzy is capable of extraordinary levels of greatness, but to me, the thing that stands out is the point where you pointed out. It's the resolve matched with the physicality, matched with the preparation, and I brought this up before, like that video where Cannonier, relatively recently, was at UFC event, and there's like Aljamain Sterling and Molly Meatball and Patty Pimblett, and they're all like having a good time. And dude, he's like, like Michael Myers, just like a psycho over there. Dude, he is driven. And you have to understand one more thing about Cannonier that I think it dovetails with the resolve. Dude, he's like, what, 37, 38 years old?
38.
I mean, he's pretty,
38.
Yeah, dude, like this is kind of it.
Yeah.
If he doesn't get this, it's very hard to think of a scenario where he's going to find himself back here. He knows that. His team knows that. Izzy knows that. So he's already got amazing internal fortitude. And he has this, like, it's either now or never situation. I don't think that's going to make him desperate. I think that's going to elevate his game, and it's going to present another challenge for a guy like Izzy.
Yeah. And a big congratulations to Jared Cannonier for getting this title shot, 38 years old, going through a number of different weight classes. And unlike a lot of the other title challenges, like you mentioned, Luke, like the Yoel Romero's, the Paulo Costas, I feel like, he's really coming to his own towards, the end here when he's 38. So much on the line for him to, make the most of this opportunity. It's almost like one of those movies that you watch where you see this guy kind of like come out of nowhere to become this, get this opportunity to beat this big champion and win this huge title. So very interesting stakes here. Just quickly, man, what do you think about the possibility of an Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya rematch? And how likely do you think it is that Alex gets past Sean Strickland earlier in the night?
I've not studied that one because I've paid so much attention to the main and co-main. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one. It's a really interesting one. It's a situation where the best laid plans of mice and men in this sport is, Pereira looks to me like a much bigger guy than Sean Strickland, and he looks to me like a much more devastating guy in terms of what he can ultimately do. But Strickland hasn't lost in 4 years or something like that. So he's been on an incredible streak, and I know that his performances don't necessarily inspire all the confidence in the world because he has this crazy rhetoric in interviews on social media or whatever, and then he has a very, I won't call it somewhat reserved style, but it's like whenever someone says reserved, that they think of that as a function of bravery or cowardice. But there's no bravery in ignorant bravery. There's not much anyway. To me, when I say reserved, I mean thoughtful. I mean, yes, maybe he doesn't have all the abilities that other, heavy-handed, devastating strikers do. Okay, fine. But if he's not, whatever else you want to think about him, as a fighter, he's quite clearly thinking his way through problems. And I do think he'll be able to neutralize Alex Pereira. I think the thing I come back to is, what is he going to do to put it on him? I don't know about that. I don't know exactly what to say, but I would say that if Pereira does get past him, I think that folks looking at what they did in kickboxing, it's hardly irrelevant. I don't think it's that. But it's very, very different. It's not the same sport. It's not the same. It's not the exact same kinds of offense. It's certainly significant defense changes. And I also wonder, all the other parts of the game. Again, I go back to it. Izzy wins his fights striking. This is how he wins. I wonder if that fight, you might see another wrinkle of Izzy where, the striking could be relatively commensurate. I mean, they're very different kinds of strikers, but they're both, high, obviously quite high level. But I wonder, you've seen some other deficiencies. Dude, there's parts of Pereira's MMA game that are green, not just somewhat underdeveloped, just straight up green. Izzy has really kind of worked to the point where he's got this Habib level almost A skill, like striking. And then he's got on the defensive side, lights out takedown defense. He's very good about getting up. And again, at middleweight, obviously 205 against Blachowicz, it didn't go his way. But, he can kind of threaten from his guard a little bit. That's not how he typically wins overall, but he obviously exerts some kind of pressure on his opponents and is enough of a threat or is able to disengage to the point where they can't really make that work for him. I wonder if he might, I always say this, someone told me this years and years ago, as a real basic level to understand something, especially jiu-jitsu, for example, there would be 3 levels to it. There is survive, defend, and attack. And so what he has done to this point is with the B-level skills. And when I say B, I don't mean crap. I mean, we're talking about everything outside of striking itself, the things that are not his most important offensive priorities. He has shown survive and defend. And some attack with the guard, for example. I wonder in that fight if you might see him now begin to attack with it, going for a body lock clinch, getting on top, right? Just, and then having significant ground and pound opportunities, or from the clinch and then disengaging and attacking on the clinch break, things like that, where you can really say, like, what would be the difference? Who would be a better grappler between Pereira and Izzy? My money's on Izzy on that one 10 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of where my head's at a little bit on this.
Yeah, 100%. It's a juicy card, and I love that they also have that Strickland Pereira fight earlier in the night. It kind of adds to the stakes and, makes it a lot about the middleweight division overall. But before we talk about Max Holloway challenging Volko for the third time in what the last fight was a razor-close decision, speaking of razors, I'm doing my own segues here. Speaking of razors, it's time to ditch that rusty razor that's hanging in your shower and upgrade to the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. I can't tell you for how many years I used that rusty razor, man. It sits there for like months and months on end. You use it, once a month or once, however often you shave your junk downstairs. You get a million different cuts. Your underwear gets, soaked with blood, and then you look like a fight of the night performance candidate down there. Never more with the Manscaped Lawnmower 4.0. With its skin-safe technology and the ceramic blade, you don't have to worry about nicking your junk. It's nice and smooth. You've got different guards for different textures. You've got 7,000 RPMs of pure power. It's waterproof. It's got an LED light. It's got a travel lock so it doesn't go off in your bag and alert TSA. And then it's got a wireless charging dock so you can smash it out in the shower, throw it on the charging dock, and just move on with your life. It is built for efficiency, performance, and then so it just doesn't, it's not intrusive in any way, and you can just move on with more important things in your life, because we know you're obviously busy with important shit to do. And then the Performance Package 4.0 comes with everything that you would ever want and use to groom yourself: the Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, the Crop Reviver ball toner, and the Crop Preserver ball toner, and then the Crop Reviver, which is a nice mid-game check if you're out and about and you feel like you're not smelling too fresh. You just pop it on the boys downstairs, and then you're back in the game. It also comes with the Shed travel bag and the Manscaped boxes as well. So as far as your grooming schedule and routine, you're absolutely covered, and it makes a fantastic gift for anyone if it's their birthday or any other significant day. Isn't that right, Dennis?
Yeah, man, for sure. And what I love about the Lawnmower 4.0 is, compared to some of these other rusty razors that we've used in the past, or electric shavers that you get for cheap, this thing stays charged forever. So whenever you need it, and you need it in the shower, it's waterproof, it's just ready to go. You just don't have to be in that moment where you're halfway through and it just dies on you. Because we've all been there, and now you're walking around with half a pube or half a beard or half a mustache, and you can't do nothing about it. And that, by the way, that Teams meeting is just around the corner, and you're about to get fired. Don't get fired. Jump on Manscaped today. Get 20% off and free shipping with a code word submission. Change your game, and it'll make it elite forever. Thanks to our friends with Manscaped. And Cass, UFC 276 around the corner, so there's only one place to go to make some serious cash, and that is with our friends at MyBookie. How about this? If you guys sign up with a code word submission, you can double your first deposit. And I kind of think this is the perfect time to do it. If you guys have kind of been sitting on a fence and are not sure whether you wanted to jump into the MyBookie pool, this is a great time to do it. UFC 276, so many opportunities to make some serious cash. What about Jared Cannonier versus Israel Adesanya? You got Jared Cannonier at a plus 320, Israel at a minus 420. Do you risk the biscuit on Jared Cannonier and potentially walk out a rich man, or do you look at Israel in a potential round to pick if you're going with him for that one? What about Max Holloway? Plus 155, Alex Volkanovski minus 190. Where are you leaning towards in that one? And what about Sean Strickland minus 105, Alex Pereira minus 125? It's all there at MyBookie. They already have odds for fights that haven't even been announced yet. These guys have you covered when it comes to crazy odds, crazy opportunities to make serious money. MyBookie is your place to go. And don't forget, you double your first deposit when you sign up with that code word submission, Cass.
Yeah, and do it quick, because I was actually, the odds have changed since, but yesterday Alex Volkanovski was the underdog, and I thought, dude, what a great way to make a bit of money at UFC 276. But speaking of 276, like, how are you watching the fights? Don't be going on any of those dodgy websites, because that's where the scammers and everybody gets you. But if you do find yourself on some kind of dodgy website, make sure you're protected with the best VPN in the world, NordVPN. It blocks your IP address, so your internet service provider cannot track or see what websites fights you were going on. Incognito mode doesn't do anything. We all know that. And in an age where your data is the most important thing to companies, it's a great way to just block that out and take back your privacy so that no matter what you're surfing, no matter what you're checking out, nobody will ever know. Also, whatever videos you're watching, there's no buffering, there's no loading, there's no speed throttling, unlike with a lot of other VPNs that, we've used in the past and trialed in the past. NordVPN is fantastic. You can leave it running in the background, and honestly, you don't even know that it's there. But in the meantime, it is protecting you. It's crazy cheap as well. You can get the standard package and save 61%. It's $3.16 a month, which is like a cup of coffee, and you get 1 month free. You can go the plus package, which is $3.83 a month. You save me 63%. This is for 2 years, by the way, and you get the data breach scanner as well, which is a nice addition. Or you can go the complete, which is the most recommended, save 69%. It's $5.08 a month, and you get 1 month free, and then you also get 1 terabyte of encrypted cloud storage, which is insane because a lot of cloud storage services, or a lot of basic ones, they give you like 5 gigs, which is like not enough to back up really anything. But with 1 terabyte of encrypted cloud storage, it is insane. All your best, most private documents, all your spiciest home videos, completely safe and only accessible to you. Your any kind of passwords, whatever you want. NordVPN will protect you from everything. Isn't that right, Dennis?
Yeah, man. And sometimes it blows my mind because we could spend $2,000 on a phone, $3,000 or $4,000 on a laptop, but at the end of the day, we forget to do the stuff that really matters, and that is protect our security and safety on these devices, and we get taken for everything that we have in our accounts, or our identity gets stolen. Don't be one of these guys. Jump on NordVPN today. Go to nordvpn.com/submission or click the link in the description below. Sign up to these incredible plans. Get 1 month for free additionally. And of course, NordVPN knows that their service is awesome. That's why they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So jump on it today.
100%. With all that said, obviously we're going to talk about arguably the most looked forward to fight of the whole night, Alex Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 3. In the last fight, Holloway obviously had a great first couple of rounds, catching Volko with head kicks and those uppercuts. But then Volko managed to, adapt and beat him in the last 3. And I know people are going to debate this, but you can make the argument that by the end of the night, by the end of that fight, Volko had Max figured out more than Max had him figured out. And we saw in the Yair fight, Max got tagged a lot. So in your mind, what changes do you think Max needs to make in order to be successful and get the better of Volkanovski?
Yeah, the first fight to me, I would not call irrelevant. Obviously, it was the fight where Volkanovski took his title, so it's hardly irrelevant. But in thinking about the third fight, the second one, I think, tells much more of the story. When Max fought Volkanovski the first time, Max is a professional times a billion. I'm sure that they trained, I'm sure that they prepped, but I think that they got, and it was a close fight. Obviously, it was a very close fight. But I think that he and his team got caught a little wide-eyed about what Volkanovski was doing and didn't have necessarily a great answer for it. But then you saw in the second fight, and especially in the first 2 rounds, they had a great answer for it. Like, it was, if he won those first 2 rounds walking away, remember, Max was styling on him, and when they were going back after the second round, like, dude, they were in control. But I made this point previously, and I think it is worth reiterating here, namely, there are 2 kinds of adaptations. One is in a rematch or a trilogy or however, whatever the iterations are. I think Marquez and Pacquiao fought like 4 times. There's between fights. Like, what did you learn from the last one? What could you take into this one? And a lot of times that ends up being all that the better, more decisive fighter really needs. It can be not just a change in strategy, but they can really work on a couple of for deficiencies, and it can make a big difference. I've often said that the person who wins the second fight typically wins the trilogy, so to speak. You go and look at Couture versus Liddell. Couture whipped his ass the first time, but the second time, the takedown defense, the sprawling, and the attacks that Liddell had ready for Couture's pressure were dynamite, and which was exactly what happened in the third fight too. They figured out what they needed to. So that's incredibly impactful, and I think that's what explains most of the success in the second fight. Max had a different stance. He was much more upright. He was much more ready to intercept rather than to sort of like try and corner Volkanovski. They had much more linear attacks up the middle with knees, uppercuts, that kind of a thing. And it played a significant role in how those first 2 rounds played out. But here is the real crux in the story of that fight. It was that Volkanovski was forced to make adaptations within the fight,
Yeah.
between rounds. And that, I will tell you, I'm not going to sit here and say that coming up with a good game plan between fight 1 and fight 2 to make improvements is some easy task. It is not. It is a very difficult task. And I often think that Max's team, those guys at Gracie Technics and Ivan Flores, are criminally underrated for how smart they are. But this is somewhat of a different skill to be able to do that between rounds. And by round 3, who was fighting whose fight? I think by end of round 3, certainly at a bare minimum, because I realized that there is some dispute about the scoring, it was mostly Max fighting Volkanovski's fight. I talk about this all the time. You look at Mayweather fights, Mayweather loses rounds. Forget about the McGregor thing or whatever that was, but look at some other fights. Like, he loses rounds, but they're typically all at the front end of the fight. By round 6, if you haven't really gotten to Mayweather, it's curtains for you, bro. You're not going to beat him, because what he does is he waits to see all the things you're doing, and then he slowly pulls the Jenga pieces away until the whole tower collapses. Now, obviously, Volkanovski wasn't able to do that totally. I think Volkanovski was somewhat surprised by how effective Max was. So the big key question is, can Max and his team, if they have a successful beginning to this fight, can they maintain that as Volkanovski begins to make his adjustments? Can they follow that and keep him on his heels? And I talked to Adrian Yanez about this, and he was telling me, the big thing is Max has got to be even more aggressive with the feinting, even more aggressive with the activity, even more aggressive, because you can watch, in the middle of round 4, there's a time when Max is, he wanted to intercept, but it's almost like he got caught looking and reacting rather than really grabbing the fight by the scruff of the neck and putting his complexion on it. I think that there's going to be an activity level that he has to maintain through trickery, through feinting. I think a lot of the same things he did in the second fight about the upright stance and then linear attacks, I think that's quite relevant, and you'll see a lot of that here. Really, that's not really what's going to win him that. What's going to win him that is, once Volkanovski changes what he's doing, can you react to that? Or at a bare minimum, can you push Volkanovski further enough in the fight where he can't make those adaptations until much later, right? Sticking a jab in his face the whole time where he just can't quite get going. It took him 2 rounds plus to get going in the second fight. Can you push that to the third or the fourth or the fifth? These are the more predominant questions. You're asking probably a little bit more about specific details. It's impossible to tell with these two, dude. These are 2 of the highest level guys I've ever seen. Yeah. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. And the second fight, I think, tells you a little bit more, as I've stated, but that's really what when we think about the core central tension in this fight, it's that.
Yeah, in the countdown, we even see Max doing his updated strength and conditioning, and he said that the key to beating Volkanovski is attrition, that he wants to test his dog. It sounds like not only Max is expecting a war, but he thinks that the overall endurance, having more fight and toughness, is the key to beating Volko. And I know you just sort of touched on that, but do you think that would be one of these keys that's going to be important on fight night? Him being able to get to that next level as these changes are happening. And I suppose it's also the updated strength and conditioning. That would play a very interesting part of it, I suppose, as the fight goes on, to see if Max can hang in there. Because we know Volko, he comes into these fights in crazy condition, crazy shape with crazy speed. Keeping up with that, it's like running a marathon sometimes.
No doubt about it. I again, it's not that Max didn't do a lot in either of the fights, but there becomes a point where his level of accuracy and activity, it kind of drops off, and it's a function of all these guys always kind of repeat this stuff interview to interview. But the thing he told me that really stuck out was what he tries to do, and this is true of anyone who incorporates misdirection or that kind of a thing. He wants to scramble their brains. That's what he says to me. When people hear scramble their brains, he doesn't mean hit them in the head and then rock them, although that would be great. What he means is he wants to force you to make a series of computations that take enough time, but he's not going to give you that time. The minute you begin to react to something, he's changing it. And so you can't make decisions behind that, because as you're computing it, there's not enough time to actually really react properly. You don't have your feet under you. You get kind of countered, whatever. He makes their decision making suffer by virtue of all of the stimuli, all of the choices that he's making them answer a series of questions in an amount of time that they can't do it. Mm-hmm. That's really what it comes down to. You've got to. I don't know how you beat him if you don't take that away. If you don't take that away, I don't know who the hell is going to beat him. I really don't, because to your point, Max changed his strength and conditioning routine. Great. I think that will play an absolutely critical role. But if you see Volkanovski dealing and he's doing what he wants and Max is confused, it's a wrap. It's not really going to matter at that point. You have to take that away. And I think partly you can do that with, well, this is the central tension here too, right? Because in the first fight, he was kind of cornering him, but he was getting countered a lot. Second time, he kind of laid back a little bit and it worked at first, but not in the second half. Can you find a way to thread the needle where at times you can lay back and then you can counter him, and at other times actually put significant pressure on him where he can't get going. He can't get the feints to work. He can't begin to build behind it where the foot feint works. Then he puts an uppercut behind it or a hook, and then the person reacts to that. So then he comes up to the middle. Like that was one of the things he did in the second fight. He was hooking till they brought the hand up here, and then he went right up the middle on him. And then as soon as they go back to the middle, he goes back to the hook, and all these other pieces that get involved. Dude, once that gets going, once that ball starts rolling downhill, the fight's over. Sort of a miracle happening. Max has to stop that.
And it's quite poetic that, you've got two of the, I know people talk about Aldo, but like Max and Volko are like contending for like greatest featherweight of all time. And then it would be incredible if Volko was to do it again and beat Max on his way out of the division to 155, even if that's just temporarily. I think it's just an incredible storyline. Like, yep, I beat this guy 3 times, 155. Let's see how you're going. We could talk about this all night, but honestly, we won't keep you any longer, Luke. L Thomas News, follow the man on Twitter and Instagram, of course, at Morning Combat. Give the guys a fantastic follow. And then, of course, Morning Combat every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern. And for everybody here in Australia, that's 1 a.m. Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday nights in Australia. Give the Morning Combat channel a time. I know you always make that joke, but hey, man, I used to be a night owl when I had a different career. Even just a couple of years ago as my side job, I was always up from 8 p.m. till 7 a.m. doing ridiculous hours. So yeah, man. You have listeners here at all sorts of crazy times. Luke, always an honor. Thank you so much for joining us. Love chatting with you.
Thank you, gents. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the fights.